It's a privilege today to be with Keithem Sacre to delve into the world of arboriculture and urban forestry. Keithem brings wealth of experience spanning over 3 decades in both the public sector and the nursery industry. As the director of Barcham Trees, the largest containerized tree nursery in Europe, he has been the forefront of innovating how trees are grown, cared for and introduced into urban environments. Keithem is a chartered arboriculturalist, holding both master's and bachelor's degree in arboriculture and urban forestry, demonstrating his deep commitment to education and advancing in the field. As the visionary, he has led the development of the new British standard BS 8545, guiding the transition of trees from nursery to independence in landscape, testament to his dedication to improving industry and standards. His leadership roles within the Arboriculture Association and the Trees and Design Action Group, among others, highlight his commitment to broader community and ecosystem management. Keith is a co-founder of Tree Economics, an initiative that underscores the economic value of trees and forests, advocating for a sustainable future.
Brilliant.
Can you share the journey which led you to Barcham Tree Nurseries, please?
The journey, how early do you want to start? So, first of all, what led me into working in parks? Well, basically I trained as a local government officer. I didn't like that. I went and worked for a local newspaper training as a journalist. I'd applied to art school twice and got a place at art school but never went. So on the last occasion I applied to art school, got a place at art school, needed a job to do in the summer, and basically I went to work in a park in the summer and found myself looking at the shrubs and trees going, I wonder what that is. And I stayed in the parks, and it was as simple as that. It was a complete accident. I then moved down to Essex on the east coast of England and began a career with a local authority there. Started digging roses on the seafront and ended up as parks manager, doing various bits of horticultural training. And then the government changed the mechanism and opened local authority work up to competitive tendering, which meant that contractors were employed, so the direct labour force of the local authority was disbanded and you became a contractor. At this point I began to recognise that the standards within local authority horticulture were going, and I started looking for alternatives, and it was purely coincidental that Knockcuts Nurseries were advertising for a sales executive to look after local authority business. I applied and got the job, and that was 11 years at Knockcuts, during which time I became responsible for all tree sales across the UK and all tree purchases from across Europe. I was also lucky enough to be working with a guy called David Cook, who had been working at Knockcuts since a boy. So he was one of the experts on tree production, and I spent an enormous amount of time with him. And it became apparent Barcham Trees suddenly appeared on the scene, offering trees in white bags. So we set up then, in response to that at Knockcuts, a container tree unit. And container tree units, you need a certain number of trees. So I went out with the managing director at Knockcuts at the time to look at Barcham Trees. And the response from the director at Knockcuts was, oh, this will never take off, container tree growing will never catch on, we will just sell them trees until they go bust. Ironically, sitting here 30-40 years later, Knockcuts have gone bust and Barcham Trees are turning over £10 million a year. During the time I met Mike Glover and a guy called Pete Wells. Pete Wells and Mike made me an offer to join Barcham, So we went out, we had lots of clandestine talks, and eventually I joined Barcham Trees, and suddenly my career, it was like, rather than being a square peg in a round hole, I was a round peg in a round hole, and Barcham just gave me license to, and that's the story really. And when I joined Barcham Trees, we were turning over 950,000, just under $1 million, and the company's now turning over just under 10 million. So that's the story really.
And as the containerized, the biggest containerized nursery in Europe, where do you feel the difference from other nurseries?
There's a whole host. I mean, Barcham has always been extraordinary in the management style and management structure. Not that their hierarchy differs, but it's the cohesive way various opinions and ideas are taken into account, and it's always been like an ideas factory. So when you had a group of people, senior management team, 5 people, all very different, but all with lots of ideas, and we just keep throwing ideas into the mix. The container production system, they've always wanted to be innovative. So I'll give you 2 examples. The first example was as the debate and discussion around circling, girdling roots developed, and there was more and more evidence that container tree production could have problems. Barcham quite rapidly developed the idea of shelf life, which said that all our trees have a limited time in a container. And that was, I don't think any other nursery actually offers or promotes that as a service. And the second was, well, we said, okay, well, we can talk to you about the health of the trees we have at Barcham, and you can come and visually inspect them. But we can't guarantee at this moment in time that our trees are in optimum physiological health. So I had long discussions with Glyn Percival at Bartlett's, and we came up with the idea of actually testing our trees using leaf fluorescence chlorophyll content. And we still do it to this day. We test something like 15,000 trees each year, taking 10 leaf samples from each tree. And we now produce a complete list breakdown of our entire stock and their physiological health. That's really useful as a guarantee to customers, but also it's a very useful production tool because it allows us to make early interventions. Like the tree may be in perfect visual condition, but it may have something hidden. We can now identify that. It's not a diagnostic tool, but it enables us to take trees out of production because we know something's wrong with them, like the trees. So we've got data that, for instance, we can record the data on Corylus calerna for a 15-20 year period, where we're able to say, okay, this is the norm for Corylus calerna, so any dip in that norm enables us to make early intervention. Containerized tree production has the benefits of the bare root system in that you have a tree that's been lifted from the nursery field. The root system can be inspected at the point of lifting, problems isolated, weak root growth separated out, pruning carried out, and then we put them in the containers. And basically the container is a repair shop for the root system, so that when the trees go out they have a full vibrant root system which aids early establishment. So, and the proof of the pudding is the fact that our clients talk to us about 93-94% success rate. Now that's success rate after planting. It doesn't say anything about longevity because there's the point at which management and maintenance kicks in, but certainly after planting we get an incredibly high success rate.
And what overall challenges do you see in the business of tree plantings at this moment?
if you're looking at the nursery, I think nurseries in general, including Barcham, have to grow up and wake up to the world that we're actually living in now. The nursery industry cannot be divorced from urban forestry. Urban forestry is the management maintenance of green space around where people live and work and play. I feel that the palette offered by tree nurseries in general is inadequate and is built on complacency. I feel that tree nurseries represent one area of the market where the producer is dictating to the client what they get. And I can't think of another industry where that happens, in that the client normally says, this is what I want. So I think the challenge is for nurseries to become part of and support urban forestry in a strategic way. That means the use of more species that are required, listening to clients in terms of specification. For instance, there's various criteria. So most 10, 12, 14 trees are delivered on a 1.8 clear stem. Why? There is no logical reason in terms of the tree that they are on a 1.8 clear stem, other than the fact that 1.8 quite conveniently allows a nursery tractor to go between the rows in the fields. So I think there's a whole series of issues to be addressed there, but the big one is, and it's double-edged, I think the client, the customer, needs to have a more developed view and understanding of nursery production, but also nurseries have to have a greater understanding of urban forestry. And once again, I've already spoken about Barcham and ideas. Barcham, again, to my knowledge, are the only nursery company that have chosen to say, okay, to one of their directors, you are arboriculture and urban forestry director, and then fund that person to go out and become engaged in the urban forestry debate, discussion, take on roles like chairmanship of the Arboricultural Association, to have organised and set up a company called Treeconomics, and that's all being done with Barcham's full support. So
we live in the time of climate change, and where the tree plantings are presented like one of the tools to fight it. What's your position on that?
I think it's probably overstated. I think that trees have a mitigation role in that they will have the potential to dampen some of the extremes of climate change. I think mass planting of trees is not the answer. I think it needs to be done against a strategic background where aims and objectives are clearly expressed and quantified, and then a gradual programme. I think you can't ignore the potential of the trees we already have in urban situations, because they are invariably poorly managed and maintained. In terms of the nursery, I think the articulating provenance is something, certainly in the amenity market, which is sadly lacking. For instance, a study was done several years back where nurseries throughout Europe were asked to identify the provenance. Where did their trees come from, or where was the propagation material sourced from? And only one nursery was able to give any information whatsoever. And for those of us that have been lucky to travel, if you look at the range of, shall we say, Liriodendron, and you look at Liriodendron, which has a range that extends down from New England down to Florida, find there are huge variations, and you could in times be looking at a different species. I think we don't use the plants within a species range. For instance, Celtis, the nursery industry offers Celtis orientalis, Celtis australis. go to the botanical gardens, you go to Kew, there are at least 10 species of Celtis open to view, and several of those have all the characteristics that would make them urban trees. So there has to be a wider use of different species, because the urban forest it's generally agreed now that the greater the diversity within a tree population, the more resilient that tree population is going to be to not only pest and disease but also climate change.
As the lead author of the British Standards BS 8545, what were the key considerations and objectives in developing these guidelines?
What I say now is highly dependent on which audience it's going to. The story goes, well, this is the story. I was at an Arboricultural Association conference, and I'd had several beers. Somebody called Mick Boddy, who was then chair of the 213 committee, which is the arboricultural committee that looks at all standards related to arboriculture and landscaping. And he asked me whether I would be prepared to sit on a revision of one of the existing standards. And I foolishly said to him, Mick, you don't need to revise it, you need to rewrite it. And he said, oh, do you really think so? I said, yes, foolishly. The next thing I know, I've got a large document from the British Standards Institute asking me to quantify what I thought the standard should contain. I thought that would be an end to it. I next got a letter saying, your proposal is out to consultation. I thought, oh, well, that will not happen. So anyway, I then got a letter saying, your proposal to produce a new standard has been accepted. So, and I said, what do I do now? I said, you put together a panel and write it. So that started a 3-year process, and the idea was to produce something that was slightly different. The limitations of the British Standards Institute meant that there were certain restrictions. We couldn't use photographs, we had to use their text and type. So we wrote this thing, and we wrote it in, we separated the detailed technical explanations from the recommendations. So the first, I think it's 19 pages, are pure recommendations, and the remainder of the document, which is I think 70, 80 pages long, is the explanations, the reasons. We tried to present it as a flow diagram which showed all the stages involved in tree planting. So we looked at policy, we looked at site evaluation and management, we looked at species selection, nursery production systems, we looked at post-planting management and maintenance, but tried to explain it as a chain of events where the weakest link of the chain could cause failure, and that weak link could appear anywhere. Has it been successful? Probably not. Much of that is the way the British standard are prepared, the cost of the British standard. So can the small practitioner justify the expenditure on the British standard? Some of it's the form and the way the thing's presented, in the absence of photographs is a real weakness. So yeah, it's been a mixed bag. I think what we've produced is, should somebody want to take up the mantle, I think we've produced a really good baseline document that needs some revision now, because this is 2014. But I think there's a framework there for others to build on, should they want to take up the challenge. But yeah, it was an interesting exercise, let's put it that way.
In that context, what's your reflection of European arboricultural standards?
I think from what I've seen, I've been very impressed with them. I think they're very workable, they're very usable. I would love to see a harmonisation, an agreed process in terms of tree planting. I would love to see the development of more integrated thinking between the rest of Europe and the UK. The UK's political situation really doesn't make that any easier because many of the conduits are now partially broken. It's our government legislation makes it difficult to mirror what's happening in Europe. But on the other hand, you have work of the Arboricultural Association, Trees and Design Action Group, who are more than willing and happy to be involved with and are in constant communication with people across Europe. So in terms of the European standards, those that I'm familiar with, I'm very comfortable with, and I think there's an awful lot of good work going on there. And there's some awful lot of good people involved, including yourself.
Thank you. You have travelled extensively, so what's the highest lesson you've learned across the road?
What's constantly surprised me is that travelling in Australia, travelling in Russia, travelling in the USA, travelling across Europe, first of all looking at nursery production, irrespective of the species, the environment, the nursery problems are fairly much the same in that I hear everywhere people groaning about the quality of tree stock that they're being supplied with, but equally the very people that are doing the groaning don't understand nursery production systems. So we have the same challenges. We have the structure of the crown, the branching system, the strength of the lead, shoot, we have the root problems, we have just the gen, but they are constant. So working in Saudi Arabia recently, I was quite prepared to be able to say, well, sorry, I can't help you because I don't know the species, but the nursery problems were exactly the same. But equally, we're working against a framework of also universal problems in the political demand for trees has risen exponentially. And again, I've been amazed how universal that is as a problem. The other thing is the competition between so-called representative organisations. This seems to be a constant everywhere as well, in that somebody will set up one group, the group will divide so that there's two groups, and every time that happens, the position of arboriculture, urban forestry is weakened because you've actually diluted your potential as a pressure group in terms of bringing, shall we say, political pressure. So in the UK, for instance, we have the Institute of Chartered Foresters, we have the Arboricultural Association, we have the Tree Council, we have the Trees and Design Action Group, and probably 4 or 5 other Trees for Cities, all of whom are making a good case, all of whom are very well intended, but are all of whom have a certain element of bums on seats or looking, so they're actually in competition with each other, so that actually restricts the sharing of information, because there's a competition in there as well, and you get to this extraordinary thing where representatives of groups offer a defence of their own organisation first, rather than really addressing the problems or discussion points, and I think that's a weakness, and that's consistent everywhere I've been.
You've mentioned the Saudi Arabia project. Can you tell us something more about that?
Basically, yeah, I mean, within the restrictions that are apparent because of the political governance of Saudi Arabia, certainly, yeah, it's a very ambitious project. It's called Green Riyadh. Green Riyadh is the Saudi authority. Green Riyadh have charged a landscape architect's practice from Germany to set up what's called a TMO, which is a tree management office. The tree management office is looking at all aspects of urban forestry in Riyadh, but which will be expanded to cover the whole of Saudi Arabia. Amongst that, they're looking at urban forest master plans, they're looking at planting and management of trees within the Riyadh area. They're looking at developing their nursery industry and the development of a nursery accreditation scheme. It's a hugely ambitious project in terms of numbers. Greening of Riyadh coupled with a huge expansion in terms of the size of Riyadh. So vast plots of land are already designated and partially cleared, ready for development. As all these things where there's lots of money, there's an expectation of instant success. The challenges are fairly obvious in that they're basically working in the desert, and water is both water in terms of quantity but water in terms of quality are constant challenges. Yeah, so that's the Riyadh project.
You are a co-founder of Tree Economics Initiative. Can you tell us something about the mission of the project?
I always felt as a nurseryman there was a gap. There was nothing that actually took what we were doing in the nursery into the environment. There was no way of quantifying or no way of expressing the value of what we did as a nursery. And I was attending a conference and heard Matthew Wells he was there in New York, and he came up with this ream of statistics about the tree population of New York. He was saying, this is the breakdown of the urban forest, this is the tree species we've got, this is the species mix, this is the numbers we've got. But more interestingly at the time was he actually started to quantify what the trees did. So he was expressing it in terms of ecosystem services delivered, so pollution mitigation, carbon sequestration, carbon storage. And he also put an asset value on. The asset value is debatable, but it was at least a figure. So it's based on replacement cost. So suddenly you had an asset value and you had a value other than the aesthetic. At the same time, Keithem Rogers, who I didn't know at all at the time, was also looking at the same figures. And we both arrived at the fact that these had derived from using a tool called iTree, which had been developed by the USDA Forestry Service, and most uncommonly for America, this was a free access and free use. But you needed training in how to use iTree. So I read in Horticulture Week, which was one of the trade publications, that Keithem Rogers was going to the USA to be trained in the use of iTree. So I phoned him up. Bear in mind at this time he didn't know who I was and I only knew him by name. And I said, Keithem, you're going to America to learn how to use iTree. I said, can I come? And politely he told me to So again, reflecting what I was saying earlier about Barcham Trees, Keithem went to America to learn how to use iTree. Barcham funded Davy to come across to the UK and trained all of us at Barcham how to use iTree. What Keithem then was beginning to work on the Torbay project, which was the first iTree study in the UK. And knowing that I'd actually had to train, he asked me to be on the steering group at Torbay. And I didn't do very much, I didn't contribute very much at all, but out of that came Tree Economics. The initial thought was we would offer tree economics to Barcham Trees. Barcham Trees were not interested, so Ken and I pursued tree economics independently. And I've always made it clear Barcham Trees have known of and supported my involvement with tree economics. So the whole tree economics thing came out of that introduction to iTree, and then the need for somebody offering that series of services in the UK, and since then it's developed from there. And I forget how many projects that we've done in London, but we've done things like the Urban Forest Master Plan for Belfast, the Urban Forest Master Plan for Birmingham. We've looked to work with Leicestershire County Council and numerous county businesses, numerous authorities across the UK. And at this moment in time, tree economics is seen as the reference point for all things in terms of urban forest assessment. And also work done with Barcham Trees in, again, Barcham was the first nursery to actually look at this entire species list and offer guidance in terms of the carbon capture potential of individual species, so customers can actually look at different species and make decisions based on carbon storage, which is just another factor that may be useful in terms of species selection. So it's a work in progress.
When you should give advice to someone coming newly into the arboriculture and urban forestry, what area would you suggest to develop into?
I think arboriculture, I think somebody coming into the industry has to think about where they sit. And I think one of the things lacking in our industry is that we've lost respect for people who work with tools. And it seems to be now everybody wants to be a researcher or to be a manager or to sit behind a computer, and those practical skills. And I think we need to revitalise the way we present practical skills and take away the dirty word from manual or physical labour, because those skilled practitioners in the nursery industry are disappearing and not being replaced. So, increased perspective. I think arboriculture has a challenge, urban forestry has a challenge in recognising that it's part of society and therefore has to become more of a people industry, in that we have to develop. And one of the things I found most useful in terms of tree economics, and it was quite accidental really, in many years ago I did a degree in social science, and that degree in social science was done out of interest at the time, but since the development of urban forestry I've found the social science degree really useful, because I can relate plant use to people, and I have a reasonable idea of sort of geographic distributions within society and the factors that make up different levels within society. So I think you just have to develop an interest in trees. I've got a little story again to illustrate it. We had a young lad at Barcham who came into the office one morning completely directionless and said, "Can I come into the sales office?" And I said, "Yeah, okay, we'll give you a trial." Anyway, after a couple of months, same conversation. I said, "Yeah, you can come, we'll take you on in the sales office." I said, "But you're going to do a foundation degree in arboriculture, you're going to do a BSc in arboriculture, that's your return to me." And he said, "I can't do that, I've got no educational background. Last time I wrote an essay was I said, my response was, what have you got to lose? I said, we're paying for it. You can't do it, fine, you've still got a job. The lad went on, and from having no direction, no career, the lad now is working in the USA, running his own arboricultural business. He got the BSc, by the way. He has an internationally convertible qualification. He has his own business in the States. He's worked as an arboricultural consultant, he's worked as an arboricultural climber, he's done forestry work, he's done nursery work. But the big thing is, he's moved from being directionless to having a career that is genuinely interesting. I think that's what arboriculture offers. Ultimately, it's a career where you will never know everything, and every day you have the opportunity to learn something. So I hope that sums it up for you. And I think the industry needs those inspirational characters, the Ted Greens of this world, the Jeremy Barrells, the Ed Gilmans, and I think the industry is blessed with an awful lot of those people because, I don't know, it seems to attract a certain type of person, and I've rarely found people within arboriculture that I actually dislike or don't get on with, and they're a very generous population, so I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your time.
You're very welcome.